The penthouse smelled of expensive cologne and copper, the unmistakable scent of fresh blood. Lila Woods stood in the doorway of the 63rd floor, her Louboutins silent against Italian marble as she surveyed the carnage before her. Her charcoal Armani suit was immaculate, her natural hair pulled into a sleek bun that emphasized the regal angles of her face. She'd walked into war zones disguised as boardrooms for a decade. She'd stared down CEOs who'd embezzled millions, talked senators off ledges, and rebuilt empires from ash. But this was different. Two men were collapsed on the floor, their faces bruised and bloodied beneath the brutal artistry of violence. A third was pinned against the floor-to-ceiling window by his throat, feet dangling above the Los Angeles skyline, toes scrambling for purchase that would never come. And holding him there, one-handed, effortless as a god holding a marionette, was Nam Jin-ho. Lila had never met the heir. She'd spent 4 weeks embedded with the Jinhua clan's operations, cataloging their sins and vulnerabilities, building the framework to transform them from a criminal syndicate into something that could survive federal scrutiny. The old patriarch had been smart enough to know he needed her expertise. Smart enough to keep his volatile son away from the consultant who was picking apart their empire piece by piece. But the patriarch was dead now. Heart attack. Sudden. Suspicious. And the man who'd inherited his throne was nothing like she'd imagined. Jin-ho was tall, easily 6'3", and built like violence incarnate. His white dress shirt was rolled to his elbows, revealing forearms corded with muscle and decorated with ink that seemed to move in the amber light, a tiger mid-strike on his right arm, geometric patterns that looked like they hurt to receive flowing down his left. His dark hair was styled back but falling forward now, black strands framing a face that was so beautiful it was almost offensive. Sharp jaw. High cheekbones. Full lips currently pulled back in something between a snarl and a smile. And his eyes, God, his eyes were the darkest thing in the room, pupils blown wide with adrenaline and rage and something else. Something hungry. He hadn't noticed her yet. Too focused on the man whose throat was giving out beneath his grip. Where is he? Jin-ho's voice was a low rasp, Korean-accented English wrapped in silk and razor wire. I'll ask one more time. Where is Lee Sang-min? The man in his grip made a ragged sound. Put him down. Lila's voice cut through the room like a blade, calm, authoritative, brooking no argument. She'd used this tone on Fortune 500 CEOs having cocaine-fueled breakdowns. She'd used it on politicians about to confess to affairs on live television. She'd perfected it until it was a weapon sharper than any knife. Jin-ho's head snapped toward her. For a moment, his expression was blank, processing. Then recognition flickered across those devastating features, followed immediately by something darker. Interest. Irritation. Calculation. You must be the consultant. His grip on the man's throat didn't loosen. My father's little project. Lila Woods. She took 3 steps into the room, heels clicking, and stopped. Close enough to be heard clearly. Far enough to be out of reach. And yes, I'm the consultant who's going to keep you out of a federal prison. Is that so? Jin-ho's mouth curved into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. It was the kind of smile that had probably made men confess to crimes they didn't commit. The kind that promised pleasure and pain in equal devastating measure. And how do you plan to do that while I'm in the middle of a conversation? By reminding you that you have security cameras in this penthouse. By reminding you that the FBI has been trying to build a RICO case against your family for 2 years. By reminding you that the man you're currently strangling could be wearing a wire, and if he dies in this room, you won't live free long enough to bury your father. Something flickered in Jin-ho's expression. Surprise, maybe. Or respect. He held her gaze for 3 heartbeats. 4. 5. Then he dropped the man. The body crumpled to the marble with a wet thud and a gasp of desperate air. Jin-ho wiped his hand on his thigh, casual, almost bored, and turned to face Lila fully. Wow, he was beautiful. Dangerously, devastatingly beautiful in the way that apex predators are beautiful. All lean muscle and restless energy, moving with a feline grace that suggested violence could erupt at any moment. His shirt was spotted with blood that wasn't his. His knuckles were split. And he was looking at her like she was the most fascinating thing he'd seen in months. You have about 30 seconds to convince me why I shouldn't have you escorted out of my building, Jin-ho said, taking a step toward her. Lila didn't move. Didn't flinch. She'd faced down worse. She'd. No. That was a lie. She'd never face down anything quite like this. Because in 6 months, the DOJ is going to seize every asset your family has spent 3 generations building, she said evenly. Because your father hired me to prevent that from happening. Because you're hemorrhaging money and respect in equal measure, and the vultures are already circling. And because right now, I'm the only person in Los Angeles who can save you. Jean Ho stopped 3 feet away. Close enough that she could smell the cologne beneath the copper, something dark and expensive, cedar and smoke. Close enough to see the flecks of amber in his dark eyes. Close enough to feel the heat rolling off him like fever. Save me, he repeated, tasting the words. Is that what you think you're here to do? I'm here to rebrand the Jinhua clan into a legitimate global logistics firm. I'm here to vet your operations, clean your revenue streams, and turn you into something the government can't touch. I'm here to make you legitimate. Legitimate. Jinho laughed, a low, dangerous sound that raised every hair on the back of her neck. You want to neuter me. Turn the Jinhua clan into a shipping company. I want to keep you alive and out of prison, Lila corrected. Everything else is negotiable. He studied her for a long moment, head tilted slightly, like she was a puzzle he was deciding whether to solve or destroy. Behind him, the man on the floor was trying to crawl toward the elevator, leaving a streak of red on white marble. You don't scare easily, Jinho observed. I scare appropriately, Lila replied. But I don't scare uselessly. Another smile, this one with teeth. I like you, Ms. Woods. Against my better judgment, I like you. He turned away, running a hand through his hair, and she could see the tattoo that started at his neck and disappeared beneath his collar, some kind of serpent or dragon, she couldn't tell. Fine. You want to save my empire? You want to make me legitimate? Let's see what you can do. I'll need full access to your operations. Financial records, personnel files, real estate holdings, shell corporations, all of it. Done. I'll need to restructure your inner circle. Anyone too violent, too visible, too compromised, they're out. Jinho's jaw tightened, but he nodded. Negotiable. And I'll need you to stop doing things like this. She gestured to the 3 men, one unconscious, one crawling, one whimpering against the window. No more interrogations. No more displays of force. You want to be a CEO? Act like one. No. Lila blinked. Excuse me. Jinho turned back to face her, and the look in his eyes made her stomach flip. It was predatory and possessive and entirely too intense. You want full access to my operations? You move into the compound. You want to restructure my inner circle? You run every decision by me first. You want me to stop being who I am. He took a step closer. Then another. Until he was in her personal space, towering over her petite frame, making her feel small in a way that was equal parts terrifying and thrilling. Then you stay close enough to stop me. Because I'm not interested in being tamed by someone I see once a week in a boardroom. Lila's heart was hammering against her ribs. Up close, Jinho was overwhelming, all heat and intensity and barely leashed danger. She could see the pulse jumping in his throat. Could see the way his chest rose and fell with each controlled breath. Could see the exact moment his gaze dropped to her lips and then slowly, deliberately, dragged back up to her eyes. You want me to live here, she said flatly. I want you where I can see you, he corrected. His voice had dropped an octave, rough velvet and dark promise. You're going to be taking apart everything my family built. Questioning my soldiers. Making decisions that could get people killed or imprisoned. I don't trust easily, Ms. Woods. And I certainly don't trust consultants. So yes. You want this job? You live in the compound. You report to me. Daily. And before you make any move that affects my empire, you clear it with me first. It was insane. It was dangerous. It violated every professional boundary she'd ever established. It was also the only way this would work. Lila held his gaze and extended her hand. Then we have a deal, Mr. Nam. Jinho looked at her hand for a moment, then took it. His palm was warm, calloused, and large enough to engulf hers completely. The contact sent an electric shock up her arm that she absolutely refused to acknowledge. Call me Jinho, he said, his thumb brushing across her knuckles in a gesture that was far too intimate for a business arrangement. "If you're going to be living in my home, we should be on a first-name basis." "Lila," she replied, pulling her hand back before her pulse could betray her. "Lila," he repeated, and the way her name sounded in his mouth, low and deliberate and slightly possessive, should not have affected her the way it did. Behind them, the man who'd been crawling finally reached the elevator and slumped against the wall, breathing hard. Jin-ho didn't even glance at him. "Welcome to the Jinhua clan, Lila Woods," he said, that dangerous smile back in place. "I have a feeling you're going to be here for a very long time." The Jinhua compound was not what Lila expected. She'd anticipated something ostentatious, all gold fixtures and tacky displays of wealth, the kind of gaudy excess that criminals with new money favored. Instead, the estate was a study in understated power. 20 acres in the Hollywood Hills, hidden behind walls that looked like landscaping but were definitely reinforced steel. The main house was a blend of traditional Korean architecture and modern minimalism: clean lines, natural materials, floor-to-ceiling windows that framed Los Angeles like a kingdom laid at their feet. Her suite was on the 3rd floor, separate from the main family quarters. Silk sheets. A bathroom larger than her Manhattan apartment. A private terrace with a view of the city that probably cost more per month than most people's mortgages. It was a gilded cage, and they both knew it. The first week was reconnaissance. Lila spent 16-hour days in the compound's converted office space, wading through decades of barely concealed criminal enterprise. The Jinhua clan's financial records were a beautiful disaster: shell corporations nested inside holding companies, legitimate businesses used to launder money from protection rackets, gambling dens, and God knew what else. The old patriarch had been smart, but not smart enough. The threads were there. One determined prosecutor could unravel the entire empire in a month. She worked. She documented. She built. And Jin-ho watched. He was always there, a dark presence in her peripheral vision, leaning in doorways, sitting in the corner of her office, long legs stretched out, doing something on his phone while she worked. Never speaking unless she spoke first. Just watching her with those dark, unreadable eyes that made her skin prickle with awareness. It should have been annoying. It was clearly meant to be intimidating, a power play, a reminder that this was his empire and she was here on sufferance. Instead, it was distracting. Because Jin-ho in proximity was a study in barely restrained violence. He moved like a predator, all coiled strength and dangerous grace. He dressed like he was trying to kill her, tailored suits that emphasized his shoulders, his height, the way his body tapered from broad chest to narrow hips. And he had this habit of rolling his sleeves up when he was thinking, exposing those tattooed forearms that she absolutely was not fantasizing about. On the 8th day, she broke. "Is there a reason you're watching me work?" Lila asked without looking up from her laptop. It was 2 a.m. She'd been reviewing personnel files for 12 hours. Her eyes burned. Her back ached. And Jin-ho had been sitting in the chair across from her desk for the last hour, radiating intensity like a furnace. "I'm supervising," he said mildly. "You're lurking." "I'm supervising your lurking." Despite herself, Lila smiled. She glanced up and found him watching her with an expression that was almost amused. Almost. There was still that edge of danger, of hunger, that never quite left his eyes. "You're going to give yourself an aneurysm if you keep working like this," Jin-ho observed. "I'm going to give us both an aneurysm if I don't," Lila replied. "Your family's financial situation is worse than I thought. The legitimate businesses are barely breaking even. Half your properties are over-leveraged. And your personnel records are a nightmare. Do you know how many of your soldiers have active warrants?" 12. She blinked. "How did you?" "I know my people, Lila." He said her name like a caress, low and intimate. "What else?" She turned her laptop toward him, pulling up the organizational chart she'd been building. "Your inner circle is too large. 20 captains, each with their own crews, each with their own territories and revenue streams. There's no unified command structure. No accountability. It's chaos held together by fear of your father, and now that he's gone." "They're circling," Jin-ho finished. He leaned forward, studying the chart, and Lila caught another whiff of that cologne. Cedar. Smoke. Something darker. "The old guard thinks I'm too young." Too reckless. They're waiting to see if I'll fail so they can install someone more manageable. Will you? His eyes snapped to hers. Will I what? Fail. For a moment, something raw flickered across his face. Grief, rage, uncertainty. Then it was gone, replaced by that dangerous smile. Not while you're here to save me. There was something in his tone that made her pulse jump. Something that suggested he wasn't just talking about business. I'm not here to save you, Lila said carefully. I'm here to save your empire. Is there a difference? Yes. Jin-ho held her gaze for a long moment, then stood. He moved around the desk, casual, unhurried, until he was standing beside her chair. Close enough to touch. Close enough that she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. You're right, he said quietly. The inner circle needs to be restructured. But if I purge the old guard without cause, I'll have a civil war on my hands. I need leverage. I need them to fail first. So we set them up, Lila realized. We give them enough rope to hang themselves. See. Jin-ho reached out and tucked a stray curl behind her ear, the touch fleeting, electric. This is why I need you close. You think like I do. Ruthless. Strategic. Willing to do what's necessary. Lila's breath caught. His fingers had barely grazed her skin, but she felt it everywhere. I'm not ruthless. Yes, you are. His voice had dropped to a murmur, intimate and dark. You just hide it better than I do. You dress it up in good intentions and professional boundaries. But we're the same, you and I. We both know that sometimes the only way to save something is to burn it down and rebuild it from ash. He was too close. Too intense. Too everything. Lila stood abruptly, putting distance between them. It's late. We can continue this tomorrow. Running, Lila? Maintaining professional boundaries, Jin-ho. He laughed, that low dangerous sound that made her knees weak. You moved into my home. You embedded yourself in my life. You agreed to supervise me 24 hours a day. And you think we have professional boundaries? We need to have professional boundaries, she corrected, gathering her laptop. Because if we don't, this entire arrangement falls apart. Maybe. Jin-ho moved past her, heading for the door, but paused at the threshold. Or maybe it becomes something better. Something worth keeping. He was gone before she could respond, leaving her alone in the office with her racing heart and the ghost of his touch on her skin. The next 2 weeks were a carefully orchestrated play. Lila implemented new protocols. Every transaction over $10,000 required dual authorization. Every new contract was reviewed by lawyers she'd personally vetted. Every soldier with an active warrant was quietly removed from operations, reassigned, relocated, or paid off. The old guard hated it. She could see it in their faces during the weekly briefings. The way they looked at her like she was an invasive species. The way they muttered in Korean, thinking she couldn't understand the gist even if she didn't speak the language. The way they appealed to Jin-ho, trying to convince him that this woman was destroying everything his father built. Jin-ho shut them down. Every time. With a cold, casual authority that made it clear, Lila's word was his word. Lila's decisions were his decisions. Anyone who questioned her was questioning him. It was intoxicating. And dangerous. Because every time he defended her, every time he backed her play, the connection between them tightened. They fell into a rhythm, working late, strategizing over midnight dinners, building something new from the bones of the old empire. He started appearing in her office with food when she forgot to eat. She started staying up to wait for him when he had late meetings, ostensibly to debrief but really because she'd grown addicted to the way he looked at her. Like she was simultaneously the solution to all his problems and the cause of new ones. The tension was unbearable. Every conversation felt like foreplay. Every accidental touch sent electricity through her system. Every time she told him no, you can't threaten that supplier, no, you can't use violence to solve this problem, no, you can't keep looking at me like that, he'd smile like she'd said something delicious and comply. He was letting her tame him. And they both knew it was only a matter of time before something snapped. The breaking point came at the charity auction. Lila had organized it as part of the rebrand, a high-profile event to introduce Jinhua Holdings as a legitimate player in LA's business community. 500 guests. Champagne. A silent auction for some art foundation. And Jin-ho, dressed in a tuxedo that should have been illegal, playing the part of the charming young CEO with devastating effectiveness. She'd forgotten how good he was at this. How easily he could slip into the role of civilized man when he needed to. He worked the room like he'd been born to it, shaking hands, laughing at mediocre jokes, charming society wives and business moguls in equal measure. But his eyes kept finding her across the room. Dark. Hungry. Possessive. Lila wore red, a calculated choice, a dress that hugged every curve and made her feel like the powerful woman she was. She could feel Jin-ho's gaze on her like a physical touch, tracking her movements as she networked and schmoozed and played her own part. They were electric. They were perfect. They were. Shots. 3. 4. The chandeliers above them exploding in a rain of crystal. Chaos erupted. Screaming. People diving under tables. Security shouting. And Lila, frozen for half a second in the center of the ballroom, her mind cataloging exits and threats, and Jin-ho hit her from behind, his body covering hers as they went down hard. The impact drove the air from her lungs. She felt his weight, his heat, his heart hammering against her spine as more shots rang out. Felt his hand cup the back of her head, pressing her face against the marble floor, protecting her. "Stay down," he growled in her ear. Then he was gone, moving with lethal purpose. Lila turned her head just enough to see him intercept one of the shooters, a man in a server's uniform, gun raised. Jin-ho moved like violence incarnate, disarming him with brutal efficiency. A twist. A crack. The gun clattered away and the shooter crumpled. There were 3 of them. 3 shooters. A rival family, she realized. Making their move while Jin-ho was vulnerable, surrounded by civilians. But Jin-ho wasn't vulnerable. He was danger in a tuxedo. Jin-ho, stop. Lila's voice cut through the chaos. She was on her feet now, mind racing. Security has them. The police are coming. If you kill them here, in front of 500 witnesses, everything we've built is over. He had one of the shooters by the throat, face twisted in rage, and she could see the calculation in his eyes. The war between what he wanted, to turn this into a spectacle, and what she needed, for him to be something better. Their eyes locked across the ballroom. A moment of perfect understanding. Jin-ho released the man. Stepped back. Raised his hands. "Get them out of here," he told his security, voice cold and controlled. "And find out who sent them." It took 2 hours to calm the crowd, to speak with police, to spin the narrative into something survivable. Attempted robbery, tragic. We're cooperating fully with the investigation. By the time they made it back to the compound, Lila was shaking. Adrenaline crash. Shock. The realization of how close she'd come to dying. Jin-ho found her on her terrace, still in her red dress, staring out at the city. "You're trembling," he observed, moving to stand beside her. "I'm processing. You did well tonight. Kept your head. Kept me from doing something stupid. It's what you pay me for. I don't pay you enough." Jin-ho's voice was rough, raw with something she'd never heard from him before. "Fear. When those shots rang out, all I could think about was getting to you. Protecting you. If something had happened to you because of my world." "But it didn't," Lila interrupted, finally turning to face him. He looked wrecked. Hair disheveled, bow tie undone, jacket somewhere inside. "I'm fine. You're shaking." "I'll stop shaking." "Lila. Don't." She held up a hand, because if he touched her right now, if he showed her any more of that devastating vulnerability, she was going to do something monumentally stupid. "Don't make this more than it is." "It's already more than it is," Jin-ho said quietly, intensely. "You know that. We both know that." She did. God help her, she did. "This can't happen," Lila whispered. "Why not?" "Because I'm here to save your empire. Because you're 5 years younger than me. Because if we cross this line, I lose all credibility with your organization. Because..." Jin-ho moved. Closed the distance between them in 2 strides, his hands framing her face with a gentleness that contradicted everything she knew about him. "Because you're scared." "I'm not scared." "Yes, you are." His thumb brushed across her cheekbone, and she shivered. You're scared that if you let yourself have me, you'll lose control. You'll stop being the calm, collected strategist and become something Messier. Something human. He was right. Damn him, he was right. Jin-ho. I'm not going to kiss you, he said, and she absolutely did not feel disappointed. Not tonight. Not when you're shaking and scared and processing trauma. But I need you to know something. His eyes burned into hers, dark and desperate and devastatingly sincere. You are the most fascinating, infuriating, essential woman I have ever met. And I am not interested in professional boundaries. I'm not interested in propriety. I'm interested in you. All of you. And I'm willing to wait until you're ready to admit that you want this too. Lila couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. Could only stand there, caught in his gaze, feeling the foundations of her carefully controlled world crumbling. Get some sleep, Jin-ho said softly, stepping back. Tomorrow, we find out who tried to kill me. And then we make them regret it. He was gone, leaving her alone with the city lights and the echo of his words and the terrifying realization that she was in far too deep to ever find her way out. The investigation took 3 days. 3 days of Jin-ho disappearing into parts of the compound Lila didn't have access to. 3 days of men arriving and leaving at odd hours, carrying information and God knew what else. 3 days of her trying to maintain the illusion of legitimacy while the beast she'd been trying to tame slipped his leash. On the 4th day, Jin-ho appeared in her office at 3 a.m. Lila looked up from her laptop, taking in his appearance. He was wearing all black, tactical pants, t-shirt, boots. His knuckles were scraped. There was a dark stain on his collar that definitely wasn't his. And his eyes were fever-bright, adrenaline or violence or both. Did you find them? She asked quietly. Yes. And? Jin-ho moved around her desk, that restless feline energy back in full force. The Park family. They thought the assassination attempt would either kill me or weaken me enough to move on our territory. They were wrong. Lila closed her laptop carefully. What did you do? Nothing that can be traced back to the Jinhua clan. He leaned against her desk, too close, invading her space with deliberate intent. I've spent the last 72 hours containing the situation. The Parks know now that touching me has consequences. Touching what's mine has consequences. The way he said what's mine sent heat pooling low in her belly. I'm not yours, Jin-ho. Aren't you? He tilted his head, studying her. You live in my home. You run my empire. You stopped me from killing 3 men because you knew it would destroy everything we were building. Tell me, Lila. If you're not mine, whose are you? My own. Liar. The word hung between them, sharp and dangerous. Lila stood, intending to put distance between them, but Jin-ho moved faster. His hand caught her wrist, not hard, just firm enough to stop her. Don't run, he said softly. I spent 3 days thinking about what would have happened if those shots had found you instead of the chandelier. 72 hours replaying the moment I covered your body with mine and realized that losing you would destroy me worse than losing my empire ever could. So don't run. Don't hide behind your professional boundaries and your age and your fear. Because I see you, Lila Woods. All of you. And I'm not going anywhere. Lila's heart was in her throat. Jin-ho. Tell me you don't feel this. His thumb was doing that maddening thing again, brushing across the inside of her wrist where her pulse was hammering. Tell me that when I walk into a room, you don't feel it. Tell me that when I watch you work, when I defer to your judgment, when I let you reshape my entire world, you don't feel it. Tell me, and I'll back off. I'll go back to professional boundaries and pretend that you're just my consultant and I'm just your client and this, he pulled her closer, until there were only inches between them, is just business. She couldn't. God help her, she couldn't. I feel it, Lila whispered. I felt it since the moment I walked into that penthouse and you looked at me like I was something worth paying attention to. Jin-ho's eyes darkened. Then why are you fighting this? Because I'm 5 years older than you. I don't care. Because I'm supposed to be fixing your empire, not getting close to you. We've proven you can do both. Because if this goes wrong, I lose everything. My reputation. My credibility. Your control, Jin-ho finished. That's what you're really afraid of. Losing control. Letting yourself want something, someone, without calculating the risks and benefits. Being human instead of perfect. He was too close. Too knowing. Too everything. I need to be perfect, Lila said, hating how small her voice sounded. Because I'm a black woman in a white man's world, working for Fortune 500 companies, trying to convince people I'm worth listening to. I don't get to make mistakes. I don't get to be messy. I don't get to be happy. Jin Ho interrupted gently. His free hand came up to cup her face, and the tenderness in the gesture nearly broke her. You don't get to be happy? To want things? To let yourself have something good because it might be complicated? Nothing about this is good, Lila whispered. You're a gangster. I'm trying to make you legitimate. We're playing with fire. Then let's burn. He kissed her. Or maybe she kissed him. Later, Lila wouldn't be able to say who moved first, only that suddenly his mouth was on hers, and she was gripping his shirt, and every carefully constructed boundary she'd built was crumbling to ash. Jin Ho kissed like he did everything else, intense, consuming, devastating. His hand tangled in her hair, angling her head to deepen the kiss. His body pressed against hers, all hard muscle and heat. And she let him. God help her, she let him because this was what she'd been denying herself for weeks. This connection. This fire. This sense of being wholly and completely wanted by someone who saw through all her armor to the woman beneath. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Jin Ho rested his forehead against hers. Tell me I have to stop. You have to stop, Lila breathed. Liar. Jin Ho. I'm going to court you, he said, pulling back just enough to look at her. His lips were swollen. His eyes were dark with promise. Properly. Flowers. Dinner. Stolen moments between meetings. Everything you deserve and probably haven't had in years because you've been too busy saving other people's empires. And when you're ready, when you're not scared anymore, I'm going to have you. All of you. Until neither of us remembers what it was like before this. Lila's knees were weak. That's quite a declaration. I'm quite serious. You're insane. I'm obsessed, Jin Ho corrected. There's a difference. He pressed one more kiss to her forehead, chaste, gentle, devastating, and stepped back. Get some sleep, Lila. We have a board meeting in 6 hours, and you'll need your wits about you. He was gone before she could form a response, leaving her alone in her office, lips tingling, heart racing, and every professional boundary she'd ever established lying in tatters at her feet. The next weeks were torture. Beautiful, exquisite torture. Because Jin Ho had meant what he said about courting her. There were flowers on her desk every morning, not roses, never anything so predictable. Instead, orchids. Peonies. Birds of paradise. Flowers as bold and unique as he seemed to think she was. There were dinners, stolen hours where they'd retreat to the compound's private dining room and talk about everything except work. Her childhood in Brooklyn. His memories of his father. His fear that he'd never be good enough to fill his father's shoes. He was courting her, yes. But more than that, he was letting her see him. The real him, beneath the violence and the suits and the carefully cultivated reputation. And she was falling. God help her, she was falling. The board meeting was a disaster waiting to happen. Lila had spent 6 weeks restructuring the Jinhua organization, and the old guard was done pretending to go along with it. The meeting room was tense, 20 men, most of them twice Jin Ho's age, all of them looking at Lila like she was the enemy. Enough, one of them said in Korean. Park Hyun-woo, one of his father's oldest friends. We've been patient. We've tried to support your unconventional methods. But this has gone too far. Jin Ho leaned back in his chair at the head of the table, perfectly at ease. Perfectly dangerous. How so, Hyun-woo-sha? This woman, Hyun-woo said, not even looking at Lila, has dismantled everything your father built. She's fired good men. She's cut off profitable revenue streams. She's turned us into a corporate daycare. Lila, Jin Ho said mildly, has kept us from being indicted. She's streamlined our operations, improved our profit margins, and built relationships with power brokers your good men couldn't touch. So explain to me, Hyun-woo-sha, why I should value your opinion over hers. The room went silent. Dangerously so. Lila had spent enough time embedded in this world to recognize the shift. This wasn't just about her reforms anymore. This was about Jin Ho's leadership. His legitimacy. His willingness to be led by a woman, an outsider, instead of the men who'd served his father. With respect, another captain said, "Min Jae, younger but just as hostile, you're thinking with the wrong head." Jin Ho moved so fast that Lila barely registered it. One moment he was seated. The next, he had Min Jae slammed against the wall, forearm across his throat, face inches from his. "Say that again," Jin Ho said quietly, dangerously. "I want to make sure I heard you correctly." Jin Ho, Lila's voice cut through the tension. Not loud. Not angry. Just firm. "Let him go. He disrespected you. He disrespected us both. Let him go." For a moment, she thought he wouldn't comply. Thought the beast would slip free and she'd lose him to the violence that was always simmering beneath the surface. But then Jin Ho released Min Jae and stepped back, his eyes never leaving Lila's. "You're right," he said, still looking at her. "Violence won't solve this." Then he turned to the room. "But let me be clear. Lila Woods is not my weakness. She is my advantage. Every reform she's implemented has made us stronger, safer, more profitable. If you can't see that, then you're the liability, not her." "We want a vote," Hyun-woo said, "on whether to continue with her reforms." "Then vote," Jin Ho replied. "But understand, if you vote against Lila, you're voting against me. And I will not forget." The vote was split. 10 for, 10 against. A deadlock. Jin Ho smiled, and it was the most dangerous expression Lila had ever seen. "Then I'll cast the deciding vote. Lila's reforms continue. Anyone who has a problem with that can tender their resignation. Today." No one moved. But Lila could see it in their faces, the resentment. The calculation. The sense that this wasn't over. After the meeting, Jin Ho found her in her office. She was staring at her laptop, not really seeing the screen, her mind racing through scenarios and contingencies. "That went well," she said dryly. "I've had worse board meetings. They're going to move against us." "I know." Jin Ho moved behind her chair, his hands settling on her shoulders. The touch was grounding. Intimate. "Let them try. We'll be ready." Jin Ho. "You're not backing down," he said firmly. His hands started kneading the tension from her shoulders, and she couldn't help the small moan that escaped. "You're not running. We've come too far to stop now." "I'm not running," Lila agreed, letting her head fall back against his chest. "I'm strategizing." "Good." His lips brushed the shell of her ear, making her shiver. "Because I meant what I said. You're not my weakness, Lila. You're my advantage. And I'm not giving you up." She reached up, covering one of his hands with hers. "This is complicated. I prefer complicated. You prefer me." "I prefer you," he confirmed, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Complicated, brilliant, beautiful you." Lila turned in her chair, looking up at him. His face was soft in the low light, vulnerable in a way he only let her see. "I'm falling for you," she admitted quietly. "And it terrifies me." "Good." Jin Ho pulled her to her feet, his hands framing her face. "Because I've already fallen. And I'm not interested in falling alone." When he kissed her this time, it was slow. Deep. A promise of things to come. And when they finally broke apart, Lila knew that whatever happened next, whether the old guard moved against them, whether the FBI closed in, whether this entire empire crumbled, she was in this. With him. For better or worse. They just didn't know how much worse it was about to get. The trap was elegant in its simplicity. 2 weeks after the board meeting, Jin Ho was in Chicago, a mandatory sit-down with an allied syndicate. Old blood. Old rules. The kind of meeting he couldn't cancel without lighting another fire, when Lila received a call from Park Hyun-woo. Respectful. Apologetic. Careful in a way that felt rehearsed. He wanted to meet privately to discuss a compromise. Some of the old guard were willing to support her reforms if she could just slow down the pace. Give them time to adjust. He suggested a neutral location. One of their warehouses in San Pedro. Red flags. Every instinct Lila had screamed red flags. But she'd also spent a decade talking hostile parties down from worse. And if she could bring even half the old guard back on board, it would stabilize Jinho's position immeasurably. Jinho didn't even pretend to consider it. No, he said flatly when she told him on a call. It's a trap. It might be, Lila replied calmly. But if even half of them come back into alignment, it stabilizes your position. Right now, they think they can wait you out. Silence hummed through the line. I'll take guards, she added. Full protocol. You'll have eyes on the perimeter. 30 minutes, then I walk. Jinho exhaled slowly. They're testing my reach. Yes, Lila said. But refusing the meeting tells them you don't trust your own authority yet. Another pause. 30 minutes, he said finally. 2 cars. And you don't step inside until it's clear. I won't. He didn't say be careful. He said, if anything feels wrong you leave. No discussion. What she didn't account for was the old guard moving faster than she'd anticipated. The convoy had barely crossed into the warehouse district when everything broke at once. A delivery truck jackknifed at the intersection ahead, too clean, too sudden. Her lead car swerved, brakes screaming. The second vehicle was boxed in before it could reverse. Gunfire cracked the air. Not wild. Controlled. Suppressive. Her door was yanked open from the inside. One of her guards shoved her forward hard enough to knock the breath from her lungs. Run, he barked. Now. She didn't argue. Lila ran. The smell of oil and salt burned her throat as bullets shattered glass behind her. She cut left between stacked shipping containers, heels slipping on wet concrete. An open warehouse door loomed ahead, dark, unmarked, yawning like a mouth. She dove through it just as another shot rang out, the echo chasing her into the cavernous space. The door slammed behind her. Silence. Then the light snapped on, and Lila knew she'd made a catastrophic mistake. There were 6 of them. Hyun-woo. Min-jae. 4 other captains, all loyal to the old regime. Their expressions held no compromise. Only cold calculation. Ms. Woods, Hyun-woo said, almost gently. Thank you for coming. Lila's hand went to her phone, but Min-jae was faster. He plucked it from her grasp and tossed it into the dark water below the dock. You've bewitched our young heir, Hyun-woo continued, moving closer. He was raised to be a warrior. A leader. But you've turned him into a businessman. A politician. Something soft. He's not soft, Lila said evenly, falling back on every ounce of training she had. Stay calm. Find the exit. Buy time. He's strategic. There's a difference. Is there? Hyun-woo gestured, and 2 of the men grabbed her arms. Not rough, but firm. Unyielding. We're going to have a conversation, Ms. Woods. About what's best for the Jinhua clan. About what happens when consultants forget their place. They forced her into a chair, metal, bolted to the concrete floor. Zip ties cut into her wrists as they secured her. And for the first time since she'd walked into Jinho's world, Lila felt real, primal fear. This wasn't a boardroom. She couldn't talk her way out of this. Jinho will come for me, she said, hating how her voice shook. We're counting on it, Hyun-woo replied. Once we've eliminated you, he'll see reason. He'll remember who he is. Who we are. And the Jinhua clan will be strong again. Min-jae stepped forward, rolling up his sleeves. This doesn't have to be painful, Ms. Woods. Just tell us where you've hidden the financial records. The real ones, not the doctored versions you've been showing the FBI. The blow came without warning, sharp, humiliating. Another followed, just as fast. Her face burned. She tasted blood. This was real. This was happening. And she couldn't stop it. Somewhere in the back of her mind, she thought of Jinho. The way he'd looked at her that morning, soft, unguarded, as he handed her coffee. The promise he'd made, low and certain. You're not my weakness. You're my advantage. She hoped he remembered that. Time became elastic. Pain became normal. She heard them talking, about how long to wait, about how to frame it as a random attack, about how Jinho would be angry but manageable once she was gone. She heard the door slam open. And then she heard something that sounded like the end of the world. Jin-ho didn't come with an army. He didn't come with a plan. He came alone, and he came as the thing Lila had been trying to tame, the unchained lion, the weapon that his father had forged and she'd tried to refine. What happened next would haunt her dreams for years. Jin-ho moved through the warehouse like a force of nature. No hesitation. No mercy. Just relentless, devastating efficiency. Men went down around him, fast, hard, irreversible. Someone screamed. Someone tried to run and failed. Hyunwoo raised a gun, his hand shaking. Jin-ho, he said, voice cracking. You're making a mistake. Jin-ho didn't slow. He moved with that feline grace and disarmed him in a blur of motion and forced him to his knees. You touched her, Jin-ho said quietly. Jin-ho, please. Jin-ho hit him. Methodical. Controlled. Hyunwoo begged. When he finally turned to the others, his gaze alone sent them stumbling backward. They fled. All except Hyunwoo, who was trying to crawl away. Wait. Jin-ho's voice stopped him. I want you to live. I want you to remember this. To remember what it cost you. Now get out of my sight. Hyunwoo stumbled out, in bad shape. And then finally, Jin-ho turned to Lila. She was shaking. She'd stopped feeling the pain, her body numb with shock. But the moment she saw Jin-ho, really saw him, chest heaving, eyes fever bright with rage and fear and something deeper, she broke. Lila. Her name on his lips was a prayer. He was across the warehouse in seconds, fumbling with the zip ties, his hands shaking as he freed her. Lila, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I should have been here. I should have stopped this before. You came, she whispered. Of course I came. He cupped her face, so gentle it made her chest ache. I will always come for you. Always. Do you understand? You are not disposable. You are not a pawn. You are. His voice broke. Lila leaned into his touch, ignoring the way her split lips stung, ignoring the throbbing in her face, ignoring everything except the man in front of her. I'm yours, she finished quietly. I know. I've known for weeks. I'm going to end this, Jin-ho said, and he meant it. Every single person involved in this. I'm going to. No. Lila's hand covered his, stopping him. No more blood. Not tonight. Just take me home. For a moment, she thought he'd argue. Thought the beast would demand its vengeance. But then Jin-ho nodded, scooped her into his arms like she weighed nothing, and carried her out of the warehouse into the cool Los Angeles night. He held her the entire drive back to the compound. Held her as the house doctor checked her injuries, nothing permanently damaged. Held her as he carried her to his suite, not hers, his, and laid her on his bed with devastating gentleness. I'm staying, he said, daring her to argue. Lila didn't. She just reached for him, and Jin-ho collapsed beside her, pulling her against his chest, his heart hammering beneath her ear. I was terrified, he admitted into the darkness. When I got to that warehouse and realized what they'd done. I've never been that scared in my life. I'm okay, Lila whispered. You're not okay. You're hurt. You're traumatized. You're alive, she interrupted. Because you came for me. Jin-ho's arms tightened around her. I will always come for you. Even if it means burning the entire empire down. Do you understand? You are more important to me than any of this. All of this. The clan. The legacy. The power. None of it matters if you're not here. Lila tilted her head back, meeting his eyes in the low light. They were raw. Vulnerable. Wholly hers. I love you, she said simply. Jin-ho's breath caught. Lila. I know it's complicated. I know I'm supposed to be saving your empire, not falling in love with you. I know this breaks every professional boundary we're supposed to have. But I love you. And I'm done pretending I don't. Jin-ho inhaled deeply. Then he was kissing her, careful of her split lip, gentle with her bruised face, pouring everything he couldn't say into the press of his mouth against hers. When he pulled back, his eyes were bright. I love you. I've loved you since you walked into that penthouse and looked at me like I was worth saving. I'm going to spend the rest of my life proving you right. They fell asleep like that, tangled together, her face pressed against his chest, his hand cradling her head. And for the first time since this entire insane arrangement began, Lila felt at peace. Tomorrow, they'd deal with the fallout. Tomorrow, they'd rebuild. Tomorrow, they'd make the old guard regret ever touching her. But tonight, they had this. And it was enough. The next weeks were a purge. Not violent, Lila had made Jinho promise that much. But absolute. Hyun-woo and the 6 conspirators were forced out, their territories redistributed, their loyalties publicly questioned. The message was clear: betrayal had consequences. And touching Lila Woods had consequences that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. The old guard fragmented. Some pledged loyalty to Jinho's new vision. Others quietly retired, taking their pensions and their secrets. The ones who resisted found themselves facing legal troubles, tax audits, immigration questions, business licenses mysteriously revoked. All perfectly legitimate. All orchestrated by a woman who understood that power came in many forms. Lila ran the empire from Jinho's suite now. There was no point in pretending anymore. The entire organization knew. She was his strategist. His partner. His weakness and his strength rolled into one. And anyone who wanted to hurt him would have to go through her first. The FBI investigation collapsed. Lila's paper trail was too perfect, her legitimacy too well documented. The Jinhua clan, now officially Jinhua Holdings, was clean. Or clean enough to survive scrutiny. But there was still one threat left. Hyun-woo didn't go quietly. He'd been forced out, humiliated, stripped of everything he'd built. And like any wounded animal, he lashed out. The intelligence came through their network on a Monday. Hyun-woo had reached out to a rival family, offering information on Jinho's operations in exchange for backing in a hostile takeover. When that failed, he'd gone more desperate. The grand opening of Jinhua Holdings' new headquarters was scheduled for a Friday. High profile. Public. The perfect stage to unveil the new legitimate empire. 300 guests. Politicians. Business leaders. The media. And Hyun-woo, somewhere in the city, planning one last desperate strike. Cancel it, Jinho said. They were in his office, the morning of the event. He looked like he hadn't slept, dark circles under his eyes, jaw tight. It's not worth the risk. We can't cancel, Lila replied, reviewing the security protocols for the 3rd time. Canceling now looks weak. It tells everyone that we're afraid. That Hyun-woo has power over us. I don't care how it looks if you're dead. Lila looked up from her tablet, meeting his eyes. I'm not going to die, Jinho. You don't know that. I know that you have 50 security personnel on site. I know that the LAPD is providing additional coverage. I know that we've planned for every contingency. And I know that you won't let anything happen to me. Jinho moved around the desk, pulling her to her feet. His hands settled on her hips, possessive and grounding. You have too much faith in me. I have exactly the right amount of faith in you, Lila corrected, reaching up to smooth the tension from his jaw. We've come too far to let one bitter old man destroy what we've built. I can't lose you. You won't. The grand opening was flawless. For the first 2 hours, Jinhua Holdings' new headquarters was a statement, 20 stories of glass and steel in downtown LA. A declaration that they belonged in the legitimate world. The lobby was packed with guests, champagne flowing, Jinho playing the charming CEO to perfection. Lila worked the room beside him, a team in every sense of the word. She saw Hyun-woo a split second before he moved. He was in the crowd, disheveled and desperate, hand reaching into his jacket. Time slowed. Lila's mind catalogued details with crystal clarity, the gun, the trajectory, the fact that he was aiming at Jinho's chest. She moved without thinking. Stepped between them. Felt Jinho's hand close on her arm, trying to pull her back. Heard him shout her name. The gunshot was deafening. But it never found its target. Security was on Hyun-woo in seconds, 3 men tackling him, disarming him, pinning him to the marble floor. The gun clattered away. The crowd erupted in chaos. And Jinho had Lila in his arms, hands frantically checking her for injuries, face stark with terror. I'm fine, she said quickly. I'm fine. He missed. You stepped in front of me, Jinho said, and his voice was shaking. You could have been killed. But I wasn't. Lila. Take care of this, she interrupted, nodding toward where security had Hyun-woo restrained. Show them what happens when someone threatens the Jinhwa Empire. Jin-ho looked at her for a long moment, something fierce and possessive burning in his eyes. Then he nodded, pressed one hard kiss to her forehead, and turned to face the crowd. What happened next was a masterclass in power. Jin-ho didn't shout, didn't threaten. He simply walked over to where Hyun-woo was pinned, crouched down, and spoke in Korean, low enough that only the old man could hear. Whatever he said made Hyun-woo's face go white. Made him stop struggling. Made him nod frantically. Then Jin-ho stood, straightened his jacket, and addressed the crowd with that devastating charm. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the disruption. A former employee with a grudge. These things happen in business. Laughter, nervous but real. Security will handle this. Please, enjoy the champagne. Enjoy the evening. Welcome to the new Jinhwa Holdings. The crisis was contained. The narrative managed. And by the time the police arrived, Hyun-woo was already being processed as a disgruntled ex-employee with mental health issues, not a coup attempt, not a power play. Just a sad, broken man who couldn't accept that the world had moved on without him. Lila watched it all with something like awe. This was who Jin-ho had become, not the unchained lion, but something more dangerous. A man who could wield violence and legitimacy with equal skill. A sovereign who didn't need to destroy his enemies because he'd already defeated them. She'd done this. They'd done this together. Later that night, after the guests had left and the building was empty except for security, Jin-ho found her on the rooftop terrace of the new headquarters. Los Angeles sprawled below them, a constellation of lights and possibilities. You stepped in front of a gun for me, he said without preamble. Yes. You could have died. But I didn't. Lila. He turned her to face him, and the expression on his face was raw. Do you understand what you've become to me? You are not an asset. You are not a consultant. You are not a tool I use to build legitimacy. You are the woman I love. The only woman I have ever loved. The only woman I will ever love. And if you ever do something that reckless again, I will lose my mind. Noted, Lila said softly. Then, because she couldn't help herself, what did you say to Hyun-woo? Jin-ho's smile was dark. Satisfied. I told him that you were more powerful than any weapon he could ever point at me. That you'd built an empire that would outlast us all. And that the only reason he was still breathing was because you'd asked me not to kill him. He pulled her closer, until they were pressed together, her curves against his hard lines. I told him that I would spend the rest of my life worshipping the woman who saved me from myself. And that he would spend the rest of his watching from the outside, knowing he'd lost. Lila's breath caught. That's quite a declaration. I meant every word. Jin-ho's hands slid up her back, one tangling in her hair, the other splaying possessively across her lower spine. I'm done courting you, Lila. I'm done being patient. I'm done pretending that there's any version of my future that doesn't include you in every possible way. Jin-ho. Marry me. The words hung between them, stark and impossible and perfect. That's insane, Lila whispered, but her heart was racing. I've been insane since the moment you walked into my life and told me to put a man down like I was a misbehaving child, Jin-ho replied. Marry me. Be my partner. Not just in business, but in everything. Let me spend the rest of my life proving that I am worthy of you. You're already worthy of me, Lila said, cupping his face. You became worthy the moment you let me reshape your empire. The moment you trusted me enough to change. The moment you chose legitimacy over violence because I asked you to. Is that a yes? That's a yes. Jin-ho kissed her then, and it was nothing like the careful, controlled kisses they'd shared before. This was possession. Claim. Promise. His mouth moved over hers with bruising intensity, his hands roaming her body with intent, and Lila surrendered to it completely. Surrendered to him. To this. To the future they were building together. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Jin-ho rested his forehead against hers. I love you, he said roughly. I love your strength. Your brilliance. The way you look at me like I'm capable of being better than I am. The way you make me want to be better than I am. I love you too, Lila replied. I love your intensity. Your loyalty. The way you trust me to guide you even when it goes against every instinct you have. The way you see me, really see me, not as a role or a function, but as a woman. Come home with me, Jinho murmured, pressing kisses along her jaw, down her throat. Let me show you exactly how thoroughly I see you. Lila shivered. That's quite an offer. That's a promise. They left the new headquarters hand in hand, the city lights reflecting off glass and steel, the empire they'd built together standing tall against the Los Angeles skyline. And when they returned to the compound, Jinho made good on every promise. When they returned to the compound, the world finally went quiet around them. The doors closed, the noise faded, and all that was left was the soft gravity that had been pulling them together for months. He touched her like he was afraid she might disappear, slow, careful, reverent. She answered him the same way, learning the shape of his warmth, the steadiness of his presence, the way safety and desire could exist in the same breath. They spoke in murmurs, in laughter, in silence. In hands that lingered. In foreheads pressed together. In the kind of closeness that didn't need to be explained. And when they finally slept, tangled together in the dark, Lila knew this wasn't just passion. It was belonging. It was the quiet certainty that she had found a place where she could stop fighting and simply be held. The next morning brought clarity. The board meeting was unanimous. Lila Woods was officially named Chief Operating Officer of Jinhua Holdings. Jinho was Chairman and CEO. And anyone who had a problem with the arrangement was welcome to tender their resignation. No one did. The empire was theirs now. Built on blood and legitimacy, violence and strategy, the old world and the new. And at its heart were two people who understood that true power came not from destruction, but from transformation. The DOJ investigation was officially closed 3 months later. Insufficient evidence. The Jinhua clan, Jinhua Holdings, was clean. And Nam Jinho, once known as the Unchained Lion, was now known as something else entirely, a man who'd been tamed by love, not leashed by it. A man who'd chosen to build rather than destroy. A man who'd found his queen and surrendered his kingdom to her capable hands. Lila Woods had saved his empire. But more than that, she'd saved him. And in return, he'd given her something she'd never known she needed, a home. A partner. A love that burned brighter than any strategy she could devise. The engagement party was held at the compound, private, intimate, just the inner circle and a few carefully selected guests. Nothing like the grand opening or the charity auction. This was personal. Lila stood on the terrace where Jinho had proposed, watching the sun set over Los Angeles. She wore white, a simple elegant dress that hugged her curves and made her feel like the powerful woman she'd become. Her engagement ring caught the light, a single diamond surrounded by smaller stones that Jinho had described as one perfect woman surrounded by the empire we built. She'd called him hopelessly romantic. He'd proved her right by describing each of the smaller stones: loyalty, trust, passion, partnership, devotion. "You're hiding," a familiar voice said behind her. Lila turned to find Jinho in the doorway, devastating in a tailored suit, that restless energy finally channeled into something productive. He looked happy. Settled. Like a man who'd finally found his place in the world. "I'm observing," she corrected. "You're hiding," Jinho repeated, moving to stand beside her. His arm slid around her waist, pulling her against his side, easy, familiar, home. "From our guests. At our engagement party." "Your mother is trying to plan our entire wedding," Lila said dryly. "I needed a tactical retreat." Jinho laughed, that low, genuine sound she'd learned to treasure. "She likes you. She's excited. She thinks I'm too old for you." "She thinks you're perfect for me," Jinho corrected. "She told me last week that you're the best thing that ever happened to this family. That you made me into the man my father always hoped I'd become." Lila softened. "She said that." "She did." Jinho turned her in his arms, his hands settling on her hips, that now familiar possessive touch that made her feel claimed and cherished. "And she's right. You made me better, Lila. You took an angry, grieving boy and turned him into a man capable of building something worth keeping." "You did that yourself," Lila replied, reaching up to straighten his tie. Unnecessary, but she liked having an excuse to touch him. "I just showed you the path." "You walked it with me," Jinho corrected. "Every step. Even when it was dangerous." Even when it was complicated. Even when it meant putting yourself between me and a gun. Especially then. They stood there for a moment, the party continuing without them, the empire they'd built humming along perfectly in their absence. It was strange to think that a year ago, she'd been terrified of this man. Terrified of what he represented. Terrified of the way he made her feel. Now, he was everything. Her partner. Her love. Her future. "I have something for you," Jin-ho said, pulling a small box from his pocket. "We're already engaged," Lila pointed out. "You've already given me a ring. This is different." He opened the box to reveal a key, simple, elegant, clearly custom-made. "This is the key to the compound. To the headquarters. To every property the Jinhua family owns. Legally, officially, you're co-owner of everything. Equal partners." Lila's throat tightened. "Jin-ho. I don't want you to ever feel like you're here on sufferance," he said quietly, intensely. "I don't want you to ever wonder if you belong. This is your empire as much as it's mine. Your home as much as it's mine. Your future as much as it's mine. Everything I have, everything I am, is yours. I need you to know that." She took the key with shaking hands, looking at the man who'd somehow become her entire world. "I know you said you were obsessed, but this is getting ridiculous." Jin-ho smiled, that beautiful devastating smile that still made her knees weak. "I told you I'd burn it all down for you. Turns out I built something better instead." "We built something better," Lila corrected. "We built something better," he agreed. Then he kissed her, slow and sweet and perfect, the LA skyline spread out before them like a promise. When they finally returned to the party, hand in hand, Lila Woods felt something she'd never truly felt before: peace. She'd spent her entire career saving other people's empires, fixing their messes, building their futures. Now she had an empire of her own. A future of her own. A love of her own. And it was more than she'd ever dared to dream. The wedding was 6 months later, a blend of Korean tradition and American elegance that somehow perfectly captured who they were as a couple. Lila wore a traditional hanbok for the ceremony, then changed into a stunning white gown for the reception. Jin-ho looked at her like she'd hung the moon both times. They honeymooned in Korea, visiting the village where Jin-ho's father was born. Walked the streets his family had fought to escape. Paid respects at ancestral graves. And Lila understood, finally, why this empire had mattered so much. Why legitimacy had been worth fighting for. Because this wasn't just about power or money or survival. This was about legacy. About taking something built in darkness and bringing it into the light. About honoring the past while building a better future. When they returned to Los Angeles, it was as Mr. and Mrs. Nam. Co-CEOs of Jinhua Holdings. Partners in every sense of the word. The empire thrived. The family grew. And two people who should never have worked, a strategist and a gangster, a woman seeking redemption and a man seeking purpose, a mentor and a monarch, became something extraordinary. They became each other's salvation. Years later, when business magazines wrote about the meteoric rise of Jinhua Holdings, they would marvel at the transformation. How a street-born syndicate became a global logistics titan. How a young, reckless heir became a respected business leader. How legitimacy had been achieved without losing the edge that made them formidable. But the people who truly knew, the inner circle, the old guard who'd survived the transition, the partners who'd watched it all unfold, understood the truth. It wasn't strategy alone that had saved the Jinhua Empire. It wasn't violence or legitimacy or clever accounting. It was love. The love of a woman who saw a beast and chose to believe he could be more. The love of a man who found his queen and surrendered his kingdom to her capable hands. The love of two people who should never have worked but somehow became each other's perfect match. And in the end, that love built something that would last far longer than any empire, a partnership, a family, a future worth fighting for. The strategist had found her redemption. The sovereign had found his reign. And together, they'd found something infinitely more valuable, each other. Forever.